Jack, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. Thrilled to have you with us today.
I'm thrilled to be here.
All right, so you shared an interesting paper napkin, and I know you've got a great story, so I'm looking forward to it. In your napkin at the top, it says, everyone says no. You've underlined no twice, and then you said, no one says it's a bad idea in the middle, and then at the bottom, you say, don't stop. Why did you share that with me?
I didn't really think about this until I started seeing about the website that I'd already done this. And the funny part was for me is that when I did this, when I wrote this thing down, this has been a theme for 30 years, at least 30 years. Because the first thing I always hear is, we need something out of the box. We need something new. And then even when I was being paid, I'd give new ideas. And first thing out of everybody's mouth was, oh, no. It's always no. It's never yes. And then after that, I'd say, well, okay, I'll bite. What's bad about the idea? I don't know. They couldn't give me a reason. And so until I heard, an actual reason, I would keep going on my ideas. And I just wouldn't stop.
That's awesome. I like this idea of an actual reason, right? Like a lot of people say, no, that's not right for me or whatever, but why is harder? Why do you think, I mean, as a a lot of different things, but why do you think it's so hard for people to say why they don't like something? Just
I think they
Jack,
don't.
did I lose you?
I lost you for a little bit. I'm sorry. I think a lot of it is they don't know what they want, but they see that as a weakness. Like, I'm a boss, I should know what I want. And then when I go in and sit down in the meeting, and the first thing I hear is, I want something out of the box. I want something new. That's usually a guy that really doesn't want something out of the box. That's been my experience. And I always want it, I understand if you come up with an idea and then somebody says, oh, that idea exists and it's brown and yours is blue. I'm like, okay, fair enough. There's so many people that see things and then forget about it and then remember it and think it's their own idea. I run into that all the time. And then there's other people who say, well, I think I've seen that idea before. I don't want to do it. I'm like, well, you really haven't. And the reason I know you haven't is because I filed for a patent and I know what's out there, and I know what's been out there since 1770. Because that's what happens when you do a patent search. You know everything that's out there.
So let's talk about the story. I mean, I think it's great for people to have a real example. You created the really awesome, and anybody who remembers anything will remember the Subway, Chicago Bulls, horn helmet. It became a sensation on one of the Bulls runs, and I think it even features in a couple documentaries. I think it's even
I've seen it pretty much. Yeah. I'm always shocked. I'm always shocked.
Yeah, but anybody who talks in the Michael Jordan,
yeah,
and it's there. So tell us about that story, because you heard no an awful lot on that journey.
I can say without a doubt, without a hesitation, that I was literally turned down by every ad agency and promotion house in the greater Chicago area that had over 5 employees. And that wasn't overnight. That was over like a 2-year period. And then later, I went to work at an agency that was one of the people that turned me down. One of the places. Now, remember, when I say turned down, I don't mean like the boss is there, the president of the whole company. I mean, like, you go into, like, let's say Leo Burnett, for example, and they had like McDonald's or whatever at that time. You don't meet with the president of the whole company. You meet with the usually one of the, not even a supervisor, but like the director of it, if you're lucky to get in. And sometimes you start with an account person and you work your way up. So you could be working on an agency for a month before you really got to a decision maker. And it just happened. And you'd always have to schedule it. Like I'd have to be lucky to work it in. I was already working somewhere else, and I'd work it in at lunch or at the end of the day. And I did this for 2 years, at least 2 years after I created it, after I had the way to produce it, way to print it, way to distribute it. It still didn't sell. I mean, nobody wanted it. They didn't want to take it. I heard 1,000 no's.
Yeah. So let's talk about the resilience. Like, what had you so convinced that this was a great idea? Because it is a great idea and it went crazy. Like when it went to the market, the market went crazy for it.
It went crazy, right?
But
and the trick
what
was,
had you so convinced? What had you so convinced? Where would the resilience come from to get to the 1,000th no, as opposed to the, you know what I mean? Like a lot of people quit after 10 or 5.
It's exactly what I wrote on the Post-it note, which I want you to know that has been a 30-year theme, because I would say, okay, tell me what's the problem with this. What I knew what the flaws were for that. This is how wrong I was about the product, the Bulls helmet. I made it in the size of my head, which is a smaller head. I'm like a size 7. If I really thought people were going to wear it, I would have made it like at 7 1/4 or even bigger. But what I really thought at that time was that people would buy it and put it at the back of their cars, in the rear window, or on top of their computer screens, because at the time the computer screen was a huge box and it was big and it was flat on top, a good 6-8 inches. So I thought fans would either put it in their cars or put it on. I didn't think anybody'd wear it. I would have made it differently, But the key was, whenever I'd show somebody this product, they'd go, "Oh, that's great. Why haven't you sold it?" I'm like, "Well, I'm trying." I didn't hear anybody say, "Hey, Pete designed something like that a year ago. It's already been on the market for a year." Or I didn't have another competitor that I saw. And so I just kept going. And I just, nobody said it was a bad idea. They just go, "No," or "Nah, it's not for us," or "We can't do it." Yeah, I just heard it time and time again. I just kept going because I hadn't been beaten. That's what I always tell anybody when they ask me, "Were you beaten? Was something else?" Like basketball's played during the winter. So if in that 3-year time span, if someone had come out with a stocking cap that had horns, I could have seen that as something that would sideline me. But that didn't happen.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love the resilience. I love the fact that you kept on going after it. You believed in the idea so much that you kept on going with it. Describe, you also figured out, I think it's also really interesting that you figured out how to make it, where to make it, the cost, you had it all figured out beforehand, right? So yeah. You prepared for a yes, despite all the no's. Did you keep on preparing more and more as time went on?
Yes. You're absolutely right. That if you would have seen me on my first pitch to J. Walter Thompson, which was an ad agency at the time, I don't think they even exist anymore, to the last pitch that I gave internally to the agency that I was at, which still was lukewarm at that time. I had learned over a period of time what not the buzzwords, but what needed to be done. Somebody'd say, "How much did that part cost? Who's going to make that? Who's going to do this?" I had it down.
So the objections, like the 1,000 no's, made the 1,001th pitch better.
Yes. I think I would have come up with the same product, but it's a battle worn thing. It's kind of what in the idea business I get mad at shows like Shark Tank or America's Got Talent or I can't think, just the shortcuts are what limit you. When you're battle worn and you go through it day by day by day, you pick up things you didn't, and you pick up ancillary products, and you pick up other ways that could be done for other teams or other things that work hand in hand, that if you'd had the quick hit immediately, it may not have worked as well. Like what happened, what turned this around for me in my mind was not just, it was multiple things. It wasn't just the product. It was the product, tying it to Subway, tying it to the Bulls. I think the biggest thing with the Bulls, they knew about this at the in between Jordan leaving and coming back. I had already shown them, and they didn't say no. But what happened was they had seen it, and then later, this sounds silly, but they were really afraid people were gonna tune them out on the 5th championship. They really thought. Remember, I think it was the 5th championship was the one where they won like 70 of 83 games or 72. And they were really worried that people were just going to turn in the last game or two. And so their enthusiasm for it was extremely surprising. And then I had some tie-in partners. Kraft had a barbecue sauce they wanted to put on the sandwich and said, we'll pay part of the helmet cost. And so everybody won. But that wouldn't have happened at the very beginning.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, so Jack, you're an inventor. You've invented multiple products that have followed a similar trajectory, right? I mean, a lot of no's before you find your way through. And I like the idea that you talked about this shortcut shows. Like there's the glamour of the home reno shows where they do the buy and flips and they do it all in a half an hour, or the Shark Tank where they do the pitch and all of a sudden they've got $3 million of valuation and funding, or America's Got Talent, whatever the case is. But that's not reality, right? The silver wand is not how it works. It's a lot harder than that. And I love the fact that you talk about the value of iteration, right? The value of where are we now? Let's adjust. Where are we now? Let's adjust. Let's incorporate value of the no. Now, after 30 years of invention, do you have like a rule of thumb of how many no's you need to get before you get a better product? Like, is that something a little bit? Not that you're looking to be rejected, but are you looking for that constructive?
I expect to be rejected. Now, I'm going to bring up something here we talked about a little bit before was this whole last season of my podcast, I purposely focused on emails coming into me saying, how are you able to perpetuate this? And it was the whole theme of last season is very similar to yours, but I called it flexibility. Because if things didn't happen, you can't be so solid. In one case, like I knew the Bulls helmet was the right design, but I was open to things as we progressed on how to manufacture it, how to get it done, how to get it to market quicker. And we changed manufacturers a couple times in the process. And that is something that the flexibility is key to being an inventor. You have to stick to your guns as best you can, but you also have to realize maybe you made a mistake, or fortunately, maybe something else came along that was better. And that's I didn't mention it, but we're talking about 30 years. I literally looked back just recently and went, holy crap, it's been 30 years of being told no and still getting the ideas done. And so that's when I started that podcast called The 30-Year Overnight Sensation, because every time I invented something, it was like, oh, it's an overnight sensation story. And I'm like, after a certain amount of time, it's resilience, it's flexibility, it's being able to take what you get and then adapt to it. And I think that's the key. And that's why the biggest part on that napkin is the don't stop.
Yeah. Don't stop. I mean, they are the biggest words on your napkin. I love the way you talk about flexibility. Flexibility, there's an earlier napkin that talks about the flexibility of behavior being a leadership trait, right? I mean, it is the ability to be flexible that leaders have. And also the other thing that you talked about, which is harvesting useful contrarian information, right? Harvesting it.
Yes.
The no isn't useful, but why are you saying no? What can I learn? How do I get better? Is there something better? Am I just beaten on this? That's fine.
Right. You have to,
but why?
you have to keep that in the back of your head at all times, that maybe there is something better there, and what is it? But that doesn't mean your idea is wrong. The number one thing about the idea, the reason that don't stop is so important, is that I can't tell any people that when they find out I'm an inventor, which is not usually my lead because everybody's like, oh yeah. But when they find out, if so many people have stopped, they quit before they even got going because they ran into something minor. I mean, it might be major to them, but they didn't take a breath. They didn't go, well, how am I going to get around that? Like, for example, a good example, and I hear this all the time, is, I went to a mold maker to make my mold. And they said $15,000. I'm like, I don't have $15,000, and I'll quit. Well, wait a minute. $15,000. Are you sure that's just not some guy throwing that out to you just to get you off his desk? Is that really the way to go? Is that really even necessary at this stage? Did you try making it by hand? Did you, there's 1,000 things where people give up. And I'm like, always like, don't stop. Don't give up. Not if you think it's a good idea, and not if someone can't give you a reasonable answer, no.
Yeah. Everybody's got ideas, right?
Right.
Everybody's got ideas, but very few people have execution and have the ability to be flexible in the storm of rejection through that execution. Because look, no baby ever walked on their first step. No race was ever won the first time out. Everybody progresses. However, somehow when it comes to our ideas, people become wrapped up in them. Now, let's go back to some of your inventions. Obviously, some of them haven't worked, right? Some of them haven't.
Well, what I say is they haven't worked yet.
Yeah. Okay. So some of them haven't worked yet. And how do you move your execution energy, or how do you even let go of it? Because a lot of people get wrapped up in the idea and they feel like it's their baby, it's their child, it's their thing, it's their raison d'etre, right? And they can't let it go. And sometimes that can be unhealthy, right? I mean, you're not talking about being blind in going after it. And there are things that you sold and let go of also, right?
And then they come back too. And sometimes they never come back. And you've just, you got to go. See, I believe you choose to be an inventor. I think that there are inventors and there are not inventors, but once that you realize that you're an inventor or an innovator or a designer, you choose to go that path, and it's multiple things. And the one thing I didn't want to have happen, and it happened, was I didn't want to put in 25 years and sit there and go, dang it, I hope I made a difference. But then 25 years have passed, and I've had multiple victories, and I'm very happy about that. But I'm still breathing. I still want things to happen, and it makes me happy when other people are happy. I always say this to people when they ask me. They said, "Well, how did you know which area to go into?" And I said, I wish I was the guy that could, solve cancer. I wish I was that guy, but I'm not. I just make things that make people happy, and for even a limited time. It might only be 2 minutes, and then they chuck it. but that's just was my calling, and I just grabbed onto it early on. And that's it. And now after doing it for 30 years, I'm like, wow, that's it.
So I like it. Make people happy. But how does Foo-Do get into that? Because that's a slightly different product, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
well,
it was a
a very different
completely
product. It's headwear, I suppose, but it's
well,
different.
yeah, I don't I used to have this old girlfriend, she'd always say, what's with the headwear? Why that? And then I keep coming back to it. But the Foo-Do, for example, started as a baseball cap, and I sent it everywhere to suppliers for food service because of one simple thing that happened. It's a great story. I was at Wrigley Field, and a young woman was serving me food, and she had a lot, I mean, beautiful braids and everything, but she had to wear a hat, and her hair was not going to fit in that hat. So what she did cleverly was she folded the hat in half, like tucked it in, and then bobby pinned it on. And the boss let it go, but her hair still was out. But then I came up with this idea for a hat that had a hair tie built into it. It had a big hole in the back so that anybody that had beads, dreadlocks, beads with extension, uh, long hair, thick hair, they could stick it back in there and pull it tight, and it'd be something for a food service. I sent that everywhere. They all thought it was stupid, but I sent it to an extremely large corporation called Sodexo, and I didn't hear anything back from them for 6 months. And I was like, man, I am just not getting past this. And then I got a call. 6 months later, I get a call from a small part of Sodexo saying, we saw your hat, but we got a bigger problem. And I was like, what? And they're like, this woman that called me, a lot of my employees spend a lot of money on their hair, and they don't like wearing a baseball hat, and they don't want to wear what we have for them. Can you develop a product that covers their hair and fits in with beads and extensions or dreadlocks? And I spent 2 years doing that, at multiple interviews.
So this is 2 years from the time you got the phone call, not
Yes.
yeah, not 2 years from the beginning, right?
No, no, the hat was 2 years before that. I had to develop it. I had to develop the Foo-Do, which in all intents and purposes, it is a do-rag with a pocket in it where you can put it on, stuff your hair in, and then use the ties to encapsulate all your hair. But the problem with hair is not that it's long, it's volume. It's volume. So you have to have something that will fit thin hair but long. Like, for example, one of the funniest things that happened to me from my manufacturer over in China said, hey, you mind if we wear these? And I said, why would you wear them? And they said, oh, a lot of our operators have to tie their hair up because they're Asian and they have long hair down to their waist. They're always being scared about getting in machinery. So the Foo-Do even helped that. And their hair was extremely thin, but it was long. And they could pack it in there, tie it down, and you're set. And that was strictly 100% from interviewing scores of people. And then talk about flexibility. I thought I had done it right. And then one of the young women said, I love this thing, but my head's hot. And I'm like, you're right. You're right. I said, but I thought you wanted to keep the oils in your hair and everything right. And she's like, yeah, but it's too hot. So then I went and I bought a very special type of mesh that's extremely light to let air in and out. And, I have the product that I like now.
And so again, I love the flexibility of behavior. I love how you changed things and you made sure you were dialing. One of the great things that I think great leaders do, is they ask the question, right? Like they ask the questions, they ask more questions. They ask, what's the problem? How do we solve this together? What do you need? What do you see? and covering that ground together is the way it does. You talked about customers being a big part of that journey, right? I mean, you spend a lot of time with customers, and you talk now about end users being a big part of that story as well. How important is it for you to be able to change your perspective and sit in their shoes?
Well, I think it's everything, but I'll tell you where I missed it. This is a big part of what I talk about in my first season of my podcast, that I blew it. I went straight out what the customer said to do, and I started designing for these women. And then a man that I met said, I could use this. And I said, why would you use that? You're in construction. He said, I spend a lot of money on my dreadlocks. And when I'm I'm a house painter, and when I paint, I sometimes get my hair in the paint. And if I was wearing the Foo-Do, I'd have control and I wouldn't have that problem. So now I'm not just selling it to, it's all B2B sales, but I'm not just in food service. I'm doing construction, nursing, because people call up. And then I even had a lady call up and say that she wears the CPAP. It's a mask at night, and that the straps broke her hair. But but her husband was a chef, and he brought it home for her. And so it's another thing from listening. I don't know how far I'll go in that business, but if you have hair that breaks from the straps, you put the Foo-Do on, it doesn't happen anymore.
That's amazing. What do you when I think that, again, this idea of execution, and one of the things I was talking earlier on with someone about is that Mike Tyson quote, right? Everybody's got a strategy until you get punched in the face. And
that's exactly right.
Right. And it sounds like you got punched in the face a lot, right? And you just you used that information to change the conversation. And I think that's that flexibility you're talking about, that ability to be nimble and float through the challenge.
Well, I've had that happen, and I've had staff members call it my, the Rocky moments. I keep getting punched in the face, and then I get mad, because where I got mad on the Foo-Do, and which really launched me to where I'm still flamethrower mad, is when people that were buyers for this big company discounted me, said, well, they don't need that. It's not needed. They can make do. That pissed me off beyond, that set me to the next level, which at that point, I didn't care who punched me in the face. I knew who I interviewed. I saw the young lady at the Cubs game. I knew who needed this product. And at that point, I was like, I wasn't stopping.
I like that. Also, because I'm looking at you, and you don't have long flowing locks. I don't think you have a history of long braids or dreadlocks.
No, unfortunately.
I certainly don't. But you championed this because you believed in it, and you saw from the clients, from the customers, from the end users, the people who would benefit. You knew the value because you spoke with them, right?
And I wasn't going to give up on them because they didn't have it. They were they're like looking at me like, can you, there was a really nice young woman at one of these cafeterias, and she's like, I could really use this. This will make my life easier. And I'm like, how do I go home and just go, nah, I couldn't. And it wasn't like it was some major crusade. It was like, I can figure this out. I can do it for her. And it's going to make her. And so that's why I get so mad, is because a little thing made that young lady's at that cafeteria, made her day easier, just a smidge. And I got some fat cat crapping on me who's a multi-million-dollar company saying it's not needed. And those are the same guys that didn't I didn't believe that women needed women t-shirts. That type of person, one size fits all. Well, we know that doesn't work. And it also makes a market smaller versus expanding the market. So now, you can buy men's t-shirts, women's t-shirts, long t-shirts. There's something for other people to buy. And that, when someone's like that and they have control as buyer, as these buyers did at this one company, it just threw me in a rage.
Yeah. Well, and I think that rage, that fire, that passion, that they didn't have to make do is what fueled you all the way.
Yes, it is. You're right.
And it's like they don't need it. They can make do because it's easier for me. That I can still see it burns you up.
It burns me to a crisp because you see me. I don't need it. Is my life going to be any better or worse if I don't have it? No, but just that thought. And so when I pitched to Sodexo, which I got the vendor license, a guy in front of me was an $800 million company, and the guy behind me was a $400 million company, and I was like a 50-cent company. But on that day, we were all on the same level. And so I answered questions that other people couldn't answer, and it was all for the employee because I knew right then it was going to make their day easier. And that was it.
So when you have a new idea today,
okay,
do you go to the user first to understand them better if it's not you? And I mean, in the case of Foo-Do, it's not you. I'd be willing to bet that in a lot of your ideas and inventions, it's not you. So do you go right to the people right away?
Yes. And I test it. I'll test it with people because I'm sorry to keep going back to this, but like my whole last season of my podcast was strictly to show people that I started with an idea and 2 more products later, I ended with a completely different product because I tested it. I saw what people wanted. I saw what made them happy. I didn't expect that when I sat down.
Yeah.
To debut a new idea.
And I like this idea that you've come back to, making people happy is what fuels you. Jack, I know that we could talk for a long time. I know you've got a great story, but our time is up here today. Thank you so much for being part of Paper Napkin Wisdom. Thrilled to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.